We don't. We're very excited about the where this is going and what it means for, frankly, for marketers in every industry, because it's an exciting future. It's a great, sort of a question set as to how to balance agency versus in-house, and it's Simon's a great place to start, and I think about it sort of on two fronts. There's the first, how fast do you need to get something out? And do you need to maintain and support it? Is it a surge activity, or is it a something you need to run and sustain? And I think there's a second layer to it as well, which I used, here when I started the Lionbridge transformation 3.5, almost 4 years ago now, which was, it was actually an and both. I needed to sustain it, but I didn't have the team and the talent who were necessarily ready. And so I was actually I used the agency not just to do some of the creation, but actually as part of the education and the ramp up for my own team, so that it became okay, go catch us some fish and teach us how to fish all at the same time. It became a sort of a learning exercise, so that when they left us, it wasn't like, great, what do we do now?
Yeah.
Right. And just, by way of example, we went out to an agency, very early on when I got to Lionbridge, really to come up with the core of the brand strategy and the core messaging set, and undo 20 years of buying things that we had never brought together, and, many different positionings. And they helped us launch the rebrand that we did almost exactly 3 years ago, sort of the new Lionbridge look and messaging. Contrast that with what we just did this summer, almost exactly the same timing. We really started the planning in June, and we've been thinking about it for a while, but really started the planning and the work in June. We launched almost, to the day, by like a month, the anniversary campaign, and it was all in-house, which I couldn't have done had we not had the experience and then built the team and the assets and the capabilities and the competency to be able to pull this off, and to pull it off with a lot more complexity than we did the first time. Like I said, we did 10 languages, across the globe, right? I mean, we literally started a rollout in Asia, at 8 o'clock on Sunday night, or Saturday night rather, for our anniversary on the 10th. And it just cascaded all the way across the globe, followed the sun kind of thing. We never could have done that had we not really learned the first time. So that's where I think it can be both it's great to get the surge and the build, and sometimes you need that. Even better when you can have that almost be train the trainers, and turn it into maintenance mode if you can.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there's two things that I really want to pull out and highlight that I think you're absolutely correct about. And one of them is that having internal competencies makes you a better client for external partnerships. One of the trends we see that's true time and time again is that the difference between a client who has internal staff to manage our capacities, that knows what we're doing and understands it at a deep level, multiplies the progress very quickly. And it also gives you that option, for the training the trainer situation, so that if somewhere down the road it does make sense to be taking competencies in-house, you've learned from us, and you've got an internal team that's kind of taken away from that what they needed. And the second thing I really liked there that I again totally agree is that when you're starting a new initiative, you need to honestly look at yourself and assess, do I have the internal capacities, be it strategy at a high level for brand, or just execution and implementation of the services themselves, whatever it might be. And then wherever there's a gap, be it at brand strategy or execution and implementation, that's a good gap to fill with an agency, so that it's not someone's first rodeo on a mission critical item. And so completely agree with you there. Jaime, something I'd love to sort of get your thoughts on that we didn't cover in advance, but is a really good one, is kind of about bundling of services. Because we've definitely found, again, when I think about what are the truisms time and time again about agency versus in-house that we've seen over the years, one that I definitely can speak to there is bundling, in the sense of, if we're doing search marketing and organic search, better to have them both in-house or out of house or with the same agency. So it's the same team sort of operating on those elements. I'm really interested to hear if you found that to be true with Lionbridge, or if you've got any other comments you'd like to share on that sort of point.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I actually want to pick up with how you ended the last topic, because I think it bridges right in here, right? Which is, you know, and it's kind of something, it's what Andrew said. It fascinates me that as an industry, we struggle with this topic when it literally is what we experience with our own customers, right? You know, if we talk to any LSP or translation agency, what are your frustrations? The client doesn't appreciate the value of localization. The client doesn't understand how we have to integrate these two different tactics. Like if they don't think about their source, then translation isn't very good. You know, it's so much better when the client's got an internal, you know, expert, or they are their own internal agency and we're an extension. Like all of our best relationships, I would argue, are where we are an extension of a highly performant internal team, right? So we know them, they know us. We have mutual respect and expertise. They're bringing something to the table and pushing. We're bringing something to the table and pushing. And that's how good, you know, internal to external localization happens, which is pretty standard fare. And I would argue that's exactly the same to your question about marketing teams, right? Obviously it's better when you've got an internal team with a competency that can understand the interplay, that I think makes it, so there's not a straight answer to your question. That is, I think about my head of, you know, digital marketing, you know, really came from a, you know, paid universe. We've got some other experts in, you know, the organic universe that, you know, and third parties that we brought in at various points. I needed her to understand that I mean, look, and I think this is both in Loc and as marketers, the thing that I think is most often failure points is a lack of understanding how all of this is a great big orchestration, right? There is no such thing as organic versus paid, print versus digital, you know, brand versus demand. These are all these false trade-offs and constructs that we erect that actually get in our way. They all have to work in harmony, and you can't necessarily do them all. And so, you know, you might start with, all right, I've got a paid expert. I want them to grow into not being a paid expert, but being a digital marketing expert, right? Okay, let's talk about how these things go together. And force the yin and the yang to start to blend. And that also, you know, knowing that I have somebody who understands paid really well, I might look for an agency for SEO if I can't fund another resource, and I'm okay there. And then I just, okay, how do we set the strategy and the tactics so that they work in harmony, so that as she is thinking about even her own paid planning stops becoming paid planning. Okay, we're going to do campaign planning. I've got a whole story on paid. Okay, guys, I need to think about how organic is going to weave in to that half of it. And I think this is where, for me, it breaks down often in the thinking set, is when we force ourselves into silos and operate like those things don't have any kind of connective tissue to the other things that happen, right? Because as buyers, you know, and this is always the key, as a buyer, you don't operate in one channel. You don't operate in one place, and you notice it when companies have disconnect. Right. I mean, go back to the early days of e-commerce. There was nothing worse than when I got a Gap coupon from Gap.com that couldn't be used in the store. Like, I don't know what their channel conflict is, right? But they were two teams with different P&Ls and therefore different merchandising and different goals. You feel it as a customer acutely. So I always try to remind my team, put your hat on the other side of this. What's it going to feel if we've got this great LinkedIn presence and then the website doesn't pay off when they land there? You have to think about this as a totality, which then gets into, great, now how do I assemble the pieces of where do I need agency? Where do I need internal? Might I walk away from a tactic because I just don't know what we're doing and it's going to be too hard?
Totally.
Right. And that's I love the word orchestration, because that, you know, that's what a great, you know, a conductor does, right? You know, how do I keep the trombone and the flute, you know, and, you know, the harpsichord all, you know, in sync and sounding better together,
Mm. And I really love the example you've given there of the paid search expert internal, becoming the point of contact to potentially an SEO partner, as an external sort of backup piece, because they then you breadthen the education of that internal player. And you breadthen their expertise to become more holistic, as you're describing, so that we're not so siloed, and there's not so much of a false dichotomy. At the ire of using a buzzword in the industry, synergy is definitely a phrase that comes to mind. Across channels, and finding where those pieces plug in. And that's, I think that's definitely a truism we can also speak to as an agency, that time and time again we see, is that when a client tries to drive success for a business with one piece of the puzzle, and to the detriment of others, or to the ignoring of others, it's much harder to find that success, because a balance across all elements ends up being the piece. And I also hear you in terms of, on both sides, as an agency and as a buyer, you need to be mindful of not having that siloing issue come through. I'm reminded of a conversation I had not too long ago, where the brand marketing team versus a product marketing team had divided budgets, and budgets combined were fine to get us where we needed to be, but siloed, we couldn't get anything done. And so we need to make sure we're not creating walls where they don't need to be. I really like that point. I know I'm moving quickly, but Jaime, your time is precious, dear sir. Another topic I wanted to sort of draw your attention to, that I find is a really good example in Lionbridge, is about how these answers can sort of change over time. I definitely find that as an agency, we have people knocking on our door that are too small and too big for certain asks at different points in time. And it's an interesting graph to think about. And I do have my own thoughts, but I kind of want to let you go first. What do you think in terms of the role agencies play in a business as that business grows? If we sort of make a hypothetical of someone on day one through to Lionbridge, that being quite a journey to condense. Help share some thoughts there in terms of, as the company grows, how do you think these factors shift?
Yeah, no, and so I think it's exactly the right way to think about it. And I use this metaphor a lot. I think I said to you, I think the world we live in it's the rate of change is beyond human capacity to absorb, and the number of channels, and this is, by the way, without a pandemic, this would all be true, never mind in the strange universe we live in, and we're still stuck in very old world industrial model, like long scale planning cycles that they persist, the some of the silos that we were just talking about, and I think they complicate this question as well. And so the metaphor I love is to think about everything as GPS. Your point of departure, your point of arrival. You don't actually know what your journey is going to look like. And sometimes I share, I was driving up to Boston a lot, where our headquarters are. I live closer to New York. Almost every week for a couple of years, and it was basically my driveway never moved, and Lionbridge didn't move, but the path up every week, it's the same 180 miles, was quite different. Weather, traffic, time of year, school buses, bank holidays, construction, and even when some of those were knowable, construction being planned, many of them not knowable, accident that happened 3 minutes before I got to that location. And I think as marketers, or really frankly as leaders, if you operate that way, it then helps. I use it as the guidepost for this kind of question, because then you get to, so like I walked into Lionbridge, we had a company that hadn't grown organically in quite a long time. It had just been taken private, new leadership team, and an assemblage of lots of different brands. Really great cores. One of the, I said this to my boss as we walked in, is like, it's nice to walk in and realize that what we have is a problem in the kitchen, not in the food supply. Because oftentimes you had a great kitchen and you don't have great ingredients to work with. Here it was more, we had an awesome food supply. We just got to help clean the kitchen up. And so we looked at the team and said, all right, where do we have skills? Where do we have to put gaps in? How fast do I have to do it? And it was clear to me I had to both have an agency to solve a big set of strategic issues that also would give us enough to work with that as I was bringing in some new talent and I was helping to grow the existing talent, I'd be left with an organization that I could run. And so, I'd like to think of it as, agencies are really going to help you do one of three things: build stuff, run certain things, or staff aug. And you need to be clear about how you're using them, what you need and how you're using them. And so in that case, I really needed build. And so I focused on getting some build assets while I was adding the folks who were going to run and who were capable of receiving those assets. And, and we did this, right? We did this big ramp, and we took a little dip when the agency left, and then we had to, sort of absorb, but that was okay. That was part of the growth. As we've gotten better, scaled our systems, improved technology and process, et cetera, now I look at them more as I'm doing a surge, or so I need to build something. So a really great example, we just launched the 25th anniversary. Everybody knows that. Simultaneously, because why not, we're also doing a refresh of a sub-brand and creating a brand new website and a brand new sort of sub-brand. And we haven't done that before. And so that I said, great, I need an agency to help us to really make sure that we land that at the highest possible level, partially because I've got this other big thing that's going to consume us, and partially because it was just enough different that I wanted to surge in with an infusion of ideas to help not have to break my team to do it. And now we'll carry that and run with that. At the same time, we have a second agency who's giving us a little staff aug surge in one of the verticals that I just didn't have the capacity to address. It wasn't part of our original plan for the year, but we needed to do it. And so that's kind of all three, how I think about, I'm used all three all at the same time to accomplish different things.
Yeah, and time and place, right? That's to your point earlier. There's a time and place for all of these functions, as an agency outside. I really love that summary of build, run, augment, as three kind of high level buckets in which those functions can be divided. I'll share my own thoughts on sort of as company grows, but before I do, there's another point there you sort of touched on in passing that I loved, of have clear goals, have a clear understanding of what you want the agency to do. Because again, with that thinking of, what are some truisms of clients that do well, clear goals is definitely one of them. If you're not sure what you want us to do, it's hard for us to do it. So I think that's definitely a good call out there as well.
But to that point, Simon,
no, please.
Sometimes I feel like I can't emphasize this enough. It's why I love the GPS analogy, because the only thing worse than having no goals is having a firmly prescribed path that gives the agency no ability to do anything other than, here's what I want. And this will sound like an aside, but I happen to be watching the first episode of the third season of Succession last night. If you're not a Succession fan, it's fantastic television. You will hate them and love it all at the same time. And I only bring it up because sure enough, one of the characters goes and they're going through a big crisis, and he hires like the leading crisis communication sort of messaging organization, and they sit down and say, hey, should you go first? Should I go first? And he says, you should go first. And then immediately says, well, you know what I was thinking? We should do this, and we should do this, and you guys are the best. Like, I want to hear your thoughts, but this is what we should do, which is how so many clients treat agencies, right? Hey, you're the experts, but we have the exact map planned out for how you're going to help us. And I think there's no greater way to fail with an agency than to design the path as opposed to being clear on the outcome.
100%,
And so as folks are thinking about goals, design the outcome, be open to a multiplicity of paths, some of which will look very strange or different. And that doesn't mean that they're all right, but they certainly are not all wrong.
Right, totally, yeah. We talk a lot about the difference between being a simple vendor and a true partner. And that's slightly euphemistic language, obviously client facing along those same lines of, you're not hiring me just to do the thing. You're hiring me to help you understand what we need to do and how we get there. I love that multiplicity of paths. I'll keep that phrasing. And you're adding to my Netflix watching list, so I appreciate you. Succession. I think as
the folks at HBO, HBO are going to be
loving us. Yeah,
disappointed
this
if you
podcast sponsored by.
head to Netflix instead of HBO.
There we go. Oh, there we go. I've got to get, I mean, you're adding to my subscription list. The bank account doesn't like it. Yeah, in terms of how companies grow, it's really interesting, I think, because again, people look for black and white answers in terms of, when you're young, do or don't agency, and it just doesn't work that way. There's too much nuance in terms of how that works. I do think it's fair to say that once you're at the size, once you're big, there's a lot more room for taking things in house, and I think there's a much more of a conversation for building internal capacities because it makes sense. There's an ongoing need, and then there's obviously scales of savings there and efficiencies. And I think also it's true to say that when people are really just getting started at a very small level, agencies will often not make sense because the numbers in the short term can be not really acceptable. And I think there's a space for conversations about freelancers and consultants in that window when you're talking really small, which is just a different window,
And we use them too.
Totally.
I use, and to me that falls under staff hog.
Yeah, 100%. That's where consultancy
not
comes
exclusively, in. Not exclusively, but quite often. I guess I'll just, just to build on that, because I think some of it, sometimes this gets framed as a big versus small. And I think I view it, I'll use big and small different. I think you have to understand the appetite of your organization, whether it is a big or small, and what food, just to beat this metaphor to death, what food they like.
Sure.
Like if you look at the other LSPs that are roughly the same size as Lionbridge, plus or minus, we all have very different marketing budgets, and we have different approaches to marketing. And I don't know if they're right or wrong. They are theoretically appropriate and fitting of those groups. And so I think whether you're a small company, there are small companies that have a big appetite to build a function and grow, and maybe they've just got an investment to do that. And there are large companies with no appetite. And so I think the key is to understand your organization, all right? Where's the CEO? Where's the CFO? Where's the board? Where's whomever? What is the appetite for this? Does this need to be a variable expense? Or, or can it be a fixed expense? Same way you plan your garden, what are the annuals and what are the perennials? OPEX and CAPEX work that way.
You're right.
And so, I think it's a, even this, I'll give you a good example, even on that sub brand that, or that we are now, growing, I wouldn't have made the same decision about how to execute that 3 years ago. Both based on where we were and what our appetite was, and what I think our future approach is. And it was clear that we had pivoted, and now is the time to do it differently than we would have. And yes, that is where we're going to go with an agency, because of the nature of it. And that was true, even though we're actually bigger and more mature as a marketing organization and as a go-to-market function than we were 3 years ago. And so I don't want, because I hear this, we're a small company, we don't have the budget for that. I don't think that's actually true. Understand the appetite, and then what is the nature of that appetite? Some of us like starchy foods, and some of us like lots of protein, and some of us only want vegetables. And they're all perfectly good ways of getting nutrition, but they do produce different outcomes, and they do, sort of meet different taste buds.
Right, and so it's good to be mindful of the diet required. I think a good pointy question to throw your way, if you're happy to play ball with me, would be, I think we've outlined some really good use cases of when an agency is really a wise decision, and I think we're very much on the same point there. Can you think of some use cases that aren't wise? Because I bet a lot of people listening to this, tuning in, are thinking, shouldn't I in a given situation? I think we've highlighted some great examples of where those partnerships make a lot of sense. Just to play devil's advocate, can you help share some thoughts on when you wouldn't advise an agency? What are some mistakes you see people making when they're trying to fill a hole with an agency?
Yeah, boy.
I told you it was pointy. You asked to make it spicy.
No, and I love spicy, right? I'll always play and I'll always bite. I think it's I think you had the failure in choosing agencies is not so much the is that well, I think you have to be really clear about what your needs are, and then really honest about your capacity to absorb that, right? So again, I'll go back, early on, I knew that what we needed was very different thinking and a different kind of strategic thinking, almost as a change management enforcing function, as much as the pure creative, and strategy that would emanate from it. It was something that could only come from outside. And so with that in mind, had I decided to go inside, I never could have produced the same outcome. Now, sometimes I don't want to produce something that is that different and, that far afield. I needed to, and this is where sometimes you have to step outside of yourself and say, it's the old saw, right? Why do most people hire consultants, right? It validates what they've been saying internally anyway, but it addresses the risk management and, it's the joke, right? Hiring a consultant, paying somebody to, read your watch and tell you the time. And there's a hint of truth in that, insofar as the third party validation sometimes can help you bring to life and push something through that you just, right or wrong, you wouldn't have been able to push through on your own. And so I think the mistakes that people make are they are either not clear about why they're choosing a tactic, they're not honest with themselves, they haven't done enough self-awareness. And if you haven't done that, it's like everything else in life, choosing an agency or dating, you're not going to end up with the outcome you want if you don't have great self-awareness, you aren't clear about your desired outcome, and you don't know what you're trying to build together. Because it's messy along the way. It is a relationship, whether it's a transactional one or a partner one. There's not right or wrong. It's who am I? What can I actually bring forward? And who's the right partner of whatever flavor to help me do that? Yeah.
I love your thoughts. You actually stole my answer to this question earlier in the piece there, when we were talking about, we've got to have the internal capacities to pull it off. So there's one thing about appetite. There's also something about is the company ready for this? And one of the ways we definitely do see clients fail is when they've decided before they got into the engagement, they don't have the time to really participate and engage the partnership, which can be, not helpful in terms of reaching those goals. We do have a good question here I see getting thrown out, Jaime, from the audience. I'm going to pull that one up front here.
Which relates exactly to what you just asked.
Exactly, yeah. Right on topic. Can an agency help you know what you need and if you have the capacity? And I think it is a really good one because I've definitely seen examples where that's been a problem. And I'll highlight one and then I'll throw the ball to you because I know the counterpoint. We've definitely seen people come in when they're hoping that the agency will solve problems that they haven't even outlined the question for. They don't even know what they're asking, and they'll arrive on the door. And I do think that can be a problematic situation. You need to spend the time and that's your same point of awareness and self-discovery. If you don't know what you want, how can you hope that we're going to help you get there? So I do think there's some requirement of an internal conversation before that happens. But to the point you'd made in conversations ahead of the webinar, like there's a time and a place for an agency there too. It definitely can be a yes. And so I'll let you sort of fill in that side.
Well, I think it picks up right where we just left off, right? Self-awareness. So what are the questions you're trying to answer? And, I'm a big believer in sort of the known unknowns, unknown unknowns, view of the universe, right? There are things we know, there are things we know we don't know, and there's an awful lot we don't know we don't know. And so if you start knowing that, you start approaching it that way, so, okay, where are we in this cycle? How well do I know this topic? If it's brand new for the organization, then you know that the unknown unknowns are actually your biggest problem.
Right.
You can put a box around your known unknowns, which will help you in framing your needs with an agency. But if what you really have is a bigger, what I really need to learn is the unknown unknowns, so that I can turn them into known unknowns. So then I can decide how to execute. Because
Sure.
I actually think that's where it breaks down with a lot of agencies, and it just breaks down for any kind of relationship. But in the agency, it's we think we hired you to solve this problem. Along the way, we discovered 17 other problems, right?
Yeah.
So there's an interesting question that just came in that in some ways relates to this.
Connects.
Right?
I was thinking the same thing.
Okay. Right. I'm trying to solve, we do, let's just make it up. I do great SEO, in English, and I don't know how to do it in, actually, let's even just do it in one language just to simplify this. I need an agency to help me with SEO. Okay, what does that even mean? Because of course, when you get into any topic like SEO, what you discover is you have to completely redo your process and your technology and your content production, right? Like it isn't, what do most people do? Oh, I need to do SEO. Well, I wrote this content. Could you please go SEO this for me so that it shows up really well? Well, that is a great path to failing at SEO, as you know, in spades, right? The real question is, what do I need to do in the way I produce content to have it perform really well in search? There's some SEO that I have to do. There actually might be changes to copywriting that I have to do. There might be changes to my voice and style guide and terminology, and there might even need to be changes in my technology.
Right.
I don't know all that unless I've actually waded into the SEO universe. You wouldn't know that. You couldn't answer the way I just did. But if I know I don't really have an SEO problem. What I have is I want to perform better in Google or whatever the search engine, Bing and, or Yandex or what have you.
Yeah.
Exactly. How am I going to do that? For what it's worth, when I have problems where I think my unknown unknowns is my biggest issue, then that is where I put the vast majority of my time. And I am casting a very wide net. And I will take months. I will talk to dozens of agencies or potential partners.
Yeah.
I will listen to lots of vendor pitches. My goal is to learn two things. It's giving me I'm trying to learn what I don't know, so I ask better questions. And maybe this helps too. As I was a former industry analyst, I spent 6 years at Forrester. The best way to learn that topic was we always interviewed, a whole set of experts. The first set of interviews was actually designed to educate us well enough in the topic that we could have better future interviews.
That's
right?
a good idea. Love
and
it.
I might even go back to some of those people. And so you had to think about, okay, who do I need to talk to first who is going to help me get almost a view of the field so I even know where to go?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a long way of getting to the absolutely agencies can help you know what you need. And if you have capacity, right to the heart of Sarah's question. But I think part of that is don't just go to one agency, right? Use the agency selection process to, and go beyond just agencies, to peers, et cetera, to get to frame enough of your understanding. So to your point, I know what my known unknowns are. I know what my unknown unknowns are. Now I get to a really good, whether it's a formal RFP or a brief or whatever, I can come to Simon and say, okay, here's what I think I know. Here's what I think I don't know. Here's my team. Help me think through this problem. How would you attack it? And there you will discover all kinds of holes. Because otherwise you don't know whether what you're getting from the agency is actually going to solve the problem, because I'm not even sure that you understand your problems or problems as such as it were.
Yeah, totally. And I think Lisa's question here, along the writing also kind of dovetails into a lot of the pieces we've been touching on about scale and leveraging external consultancy. A lot of the clients that we have the greatest outcomes with in due time at volume are doing the writing on their end. And it ends up being the agency that's doing the topic discovery and optimization and implementation, but it's actually the client doing the writing. And the reason is efficiency gains at scale. Once we're writing 80 pieces a month or something, it makes sense to have that team on the inside, and everyone's going to have the outcome. And I think that also kind of supports the overarching point we've been making of there's a false dichotomy here. Leveraging an agency with internal capacities is often the optimal solution to be working towards. And that these two things aren't opposed, but in fact are the sides of the same coin, you know?
Well, and writing, by the way, is not, some universal blob, right? I mean, we
Right,
just
totally.
had this discussion with my team this morning, right? I've got a small but very effective internal writing team. They're really good at long form content.
Yeah, skyscraper.
Now that was the problem I was solving 3 years ago. We needed a whole content refresh. We've developed an enormous amount of content that's out there. As we are, we've now gotten into the sort of the mastery of our evergreen content. And I've got this huge library. It's pivoting a little bit. And what we need now is increasing expertise in not so much developing the evergreen content, but in promoting the evergreen content, in tuning it. I need more direct copywriting experience, et cetera. So we started, as a great example, we have we actually looked at hiring a person. It just wasn't the right fit then. We hired her as a freelancer. It started part-time. It's gotten to be more work. It could be full-time, or it might be her managing a bunch of other freelancers, because what we need is, or I've got to take one of my people on my team and say, okay, I need to now upskill you to get you to be able to think like a copywriter and a direct response marketer more than a long form, copy creator. And so, and they're both very valuable, but they're actually quite different.
Right.
And they're both necessary. And I've now added the advanced tactic that I couldn't have 3 years ago. But so this goes to the heart of the question, Lisa, which is you got to, what is it? Where's your biggest need now?
Right.
Do you solve that internal or external? And then how do you solve those other pieces that kind of surround it? So, I mean, there are so many great freelance external writers. You got to know which content, how much work are they going to have to do to even understand your industry? Will you give them more so that the first piece, which will be a ton of work to get, there'll be 27,000 drafts to get there. The 10th piece won't. I mean, whether it's a full agency or it's a freelancer, it's going to be the same problem. It's easier, frankly, for the freelancer to do a bunch of our direct copywriting than it is the long form stuff, which is partly what guided me hiring long form writers and outsourcing the ad units or the LinkedIn, snippets or some of those other stuff. Because it was just easier to outsource and to do effectively. So that's sort of part of the calculus.
Yeah. And I think you're also reiterating the point of don't come into the conversation expecting to know how the journey will look. I think finding the right copywriting workflow is iterative. Like all things in life, you don't start with perfection. To your point, there are 400 drafts versus one for the 10th piece. We often go through loops of feedback, figuring out what's the best balance. Does the client do the first draft? We optimize and they check from there. Do we do the first draft? They check and so on and so forth. So there's, but be open to new ideas and try different things, and you'll find the workflow that works for you. Once you've got the right partner, the specifics of that workflow can take time to sort of refine together. I think that's a really good one.
And I think it partly even depends on your project too. For the anniversary is a good example, and we've built this idea of localize everything, whole new messaging architecture for us.
Yeah. For
this exercise, and I know my team hated it, and I do this periodically. I then became the boss. Everything came through me. I was going to approve everything. I was going to help author some of it, et cetera, because we were really laying this big foundational messaging architecture to build from. Who I needed to create that and how we were creating it looks very different than what I'm going to do from now on.
Yeah.
Right. Pretty soon now we've created the foundation, and I'm going to hand it off to my team, and it's like, you go execute, and we're just going to talk about results.
Yeah.
And I don't need to be in the process anymore because of what we did. And I think it's not as simple as, do I hire an external writer? You really have to know, what is the outcome you need?
Right.
What is the skill set you need? What is the probability of success of each of these tactics, right?
Totally.
If you decide to vacation in Antarctica, walking there is not an option. Even if you know how to walk really, really well. So, you have to be really clear on the outcome set.
You'll need some decent swimming skills and a hell of a wetsuit. And look, I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. I know Andrew wants to have a sort of a buffer at the back here on the timing, but I've got one more question from Lisa. I did want to give some airtime to, because I think it's a good one. And I think it also feeds back into what we've kind of been touching on. That external partnerships can be a good piece of the puzzle to leverage. You're quite right, Lisa, that a lot of things are changing in this industry constantly. That's never stopped, and I don't think it ever will. It's just that nature of the beast. But that's a very good opportunity to be leveraging external partnerships, because it's precisely our job to be doing that, staying on top of the 55,000 things that are changing in our space. And I know that looks different agency to agency, but we certainly do have an investment of resources to be staying on top of that within each department. And so, leveraging an external vendor whose whole day job it is to stay on top of those evolutions in the industry is definitely what I'd be thinking out loud there, Lisa. And back to Jamie's point from earlier in the conversation, you end up with an internal champion who's got a nuanced understanding of the space and how the agency they've been working with has been staying on top of that one. So Andrew does tell me we've got time for a couple more questions, so please do feel free to continue submitting them, friends. But to pivot back on another topic, Jamie, that we had sort of looked at a little earlier in the piece, I'd love to hear how, once you're at this point where you've got we've gone past build and you're maintaining internally, what are the times that flag for you, I want to have that staff augmenting sort of capacity? What are the flags on your side that from where you're sitting, you say, hey, this is another time I need to look for an agency? And I'm sort of being mindful again to the listener, thinking, what flags might they look for that tells you, hey, this might be something that an agency should be helping me with?
Yeah, no, it's a boy. I wish I could say that there's like this easily quantifiable list. I'm at the point of my career where I can just kind of feel it.
Sure.
I'm a very data driven person, but you can just kind of have feel. But I guess I'll say it this way. I think, on multiple levels, the first question is, how different and new or disruptive is this area? Like, how different is it from what we already do? So I'll give you, if you've never done search before, maybe this is this is probably a good time to try to find somebody who can help you explore your way through it. And I think even in that calculus, it's, don't assume that even the first partner you find is the first partner you're going to want to work with forever, but they might be the right partner for you at that moment. Get you off the ground, because it is new. Going back to the key is, how do I get to a point where I've got maturity in the known knowns and the unknown unknowns, that we can move, we're less in build and learn and we're more in execute, refine, optimize. I was going to say that helps you choose when you go outside or inside, but even that I don't think answers the question, because it's who do I, sometimes you're just going outside for all three of those phases. It doesn't matter, because you're an organization or you have a CFO who believes in a light staff and they'd rather have a variable budget. And so you're going to go to agencies or freelancers,
right?
But different agencies and different freelancers at any given moment in the journey, in the same way I was just talking about my copy team. I had no content writers. I built a new set of content writers. They served the big purpose we had, and I augmented them a little bit with some outside skills. And now we're at an inflection point I can feel, where based on our tactics and what the business expects of me and my team, that I'm going to look for some new skills. And I don't know yet if it's going to be freelance or internal. I'm convinced that long term I'm going to have some of it internal. So now I got to figure out, can I get there fast enough with the internal person, or do I need to put, it's like the movies where they put the little nitrous canister to get that little extra surge in up speed, right? It doesn't last very long, but it's an important surge. And sometimes that's what you need. And that's where I will often look for agencies, is when I need sort of the marketing equivalent of nitrous oxide in my gas tank. Because it is going to help you get somewhere faster, but it isn't a sustainable run strategy.
Right, it's a long-term plan.
Right, it's a rocket booster. So yeah, you're going to beat gravity, but you know, you can't fly to the other side of the galaxy on it. So you gotta sort of have both pieces.
Andrew, I see you coming back on screen. Good, Sarah. I'm watching the clock for us here. We've got a couple more questions here, and they're big ones. Should we tackle a question two left, or would you like to sort of move on to the debrief?
No. I think if we have a couple of questions, I'll drop back out and we'll answer them. I had one of my own, but I'll let the audience ask their questions.
These are just too juicy. I couldn't help myself. I'm reading these. I'm sure you're reading the same, Jamie. They're fantastic. There's kind of a question about industry specialized agencies. Is it, in your experience, has it been hard working with agencies, bringing them up to speed on who you are and how you work? Because I definitely know.
I don't know who those agencies are that understand our industry. Considering how much work I spend telling friends and family about what we do. So
totally.
Look, this is an age-old question for every industry. And so on some level, can you go find an agency who's done this before? Sure, that helps. But here's the thing, right? Like, and this will seem like an aside. One of my very, very favorite commercials. I mark sort of big key topics almost by favorite commercial that represents it. And there was a commercial 15 years ago. You can find it on I send the link for anybody who wants it. It's an old Wachovia commercial, which is a U.S. bank that doesn't even exist anymore. And it was called Uncommon Wisdom. And it showed a Milan runway scene with, big EDM music and this crazy outfit kind of walking down the runway for the first half of the commercial. And then it pans out and flips into a school gym and a parent-teacher meeting, or parent, sort of the PTOs with the administration, and the principal says, "Hey, are there any questions?" And it flips to the back of the room, and there's a soccer mom wearing the same thing that was in Milan. Right? And just because it looked good over there doesn't mean it looks good over here.
Yeah, context.
Right? And it is. And I think this is the same thing about thinking about agency partners. You can teach the agency about Loc, and more importantly, you should know about Loc. Every industry does this. We in this industry, I think, have a particular affinity and attraction to people who understand and appreciate linguistics and language, etc. And that's great. And we overvalue that over the things that the problems we're actually trying to solve. You're trying to solve a marketing problem, not a Loc problem.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Find a willing agency partner. And that's part of your journey, that you're going to have to bring them up to speed, or you're going to have to fill in that gap.
Yeah.
And you have a better chance of filling in the gap for them than you do of learning SEO, because you don't know the SEO and they don't know Loc. So who's going to win that race?
Totally.
You got to figure out how to bring them together. So look, it's always a challenge. That's why you want to find a good partner who you think will listen and learn.
Yeah.
But look, it's no different than bringing on a new employee. You have to teach them how you work and your industry and the rest of it. And same with an agency. And importantly, you have to invest.
Right.
Right. You can't just write a brief and hand it to the agency and expect great outcomes. You have to invest in it.
Right.
And so I think as you think about the agency and how you think about your process, if you're bringing in somebody new, that's where your investment is.
Yeah. I think internal buy-in, internal champions are a big part of this. To the question there from the anonymous listener, which kind of dovetails into Sarah's question, which is why it's great we could hit both there at once. Look, it's kind of a rapid fire recap of some of the key points I think we've sort of touched on a few times here. You need to know your organizational profile. In terms of what your company's looking for, what they're ready for, and also the kind of landscape you just described of, do we want a variable budget and a lot of external consultancy, or are we the kind of company that's trying to build everything in-house for the long term? Know your appetites and needs, like what are you trying to get to in an objective-based outcome, don't be input oriented. Know your capacities so that you know what you can do in-house and where those gaps are and where we need the help. Be outcome oriented, not how I want to get there, which is be open to multiple paths and have an internal champion, whether it's, as Jaime was touching on, him reviewing every piece of content, right? There's a time and a place for that. But you're always going to need an internal champion that's connected to that collaboration. So I'm loving all the discussion here. Andrew, I do want to be mindful of your time, and Jaime, I appreciate you both. So I'll bring you back on stage, Andrew, if you're there. I see we're 2 minutes down to the end of the hour, and I'll push us through back to that next slide for you, mate.
Not to worry. Thank you very much, Jaime and Simon, for a very energetic and exciting and insightful conversation. I know that when, Jaime, you were that internal champion who was able to drive such tremendous change through Lionbridge, and thankfully you had the internal support, I think, as well. And I know you probably had some internal challenges and debates as well, about that time.
Okay. Easy. Wasn't easy.
But one of the reasons I'm so glad you were able to do this is because the results that you see in the SEO rankings, not just in English, but in so many languages now, is really starting to bear fruit. And, that's the investment of all that time and energy and working with the agencies and your team that you've built. Similarly, Simon, thank you very much for that excellent summary. It's just another cap on a really good event. In the sense that it's very enriching for anyone who's listening and wants to take this away and apply it to their own business. Now, obviously, there's a lot more questions here. So in that regard, you can contact Simon at SocialSEO if you would like to ask any further questions. He's an expert in digital marketing, SEO, and the full range and suite of products and services. I almost wanted to get into talking about video today, but I mean, we just have run out of time. That said, SocialSEO is offering a complimentary consultation, which is definitely worth your time if you want to raise your rankings and generate more leads online. This is something else that I think, Jaime, you guys have had pretty good success with in terms of inbound lead generation through great SEO. Meanwhile, Slater would like to hear your thoughts about today's events. Please, fill out your feedback form when we send it to you. We're going to be sending out an email tomorrow together with a link to the recording. Now, if you'd like to look beyond digital marketing, then I recommend Slater's reports and pro guides. All of these 2021 reports, as well as the reports of previous years, are available online and in our research. Similarly, if you enjoy this type of engagement, you love hearing from industry leaders at the coalface like Jaime, join us at our next SlaterCon remote on December 1st. We have a number of CEOs, technologists, and enterprise end clients all joining us in a very time-efficient 4-hour program. And if you register before November 1st, you'll be able to save 15% on an early bird discount. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you online very soon. And thank you, Jaime. Thank you, Simon, for an incredible conversation. Please stay safe. And until we meet again, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.